As Mark lies unconscious following his seizure from the reintegration process, the 7th episode of Severance Season 2 finally gives us a look into the history of Mark and Gemma's relationship. We get to see how they met, how they had a loving marriage, how that marriage became strained after Gemma suffers a miscarriage, how they signed up for a fertility treatment at a Lumen clinic, and how Mark began to bury himself in his work, to the point where he declined to go out with Gemma on the night where she allegedly died. And since this is the first time that we've seen these versions of the characters together, I have to admit that this made for an incredibly emotional episode. Because it's one thing to know that Mark losing his wife is inherently sad, but it's another thing altogether to see that relationship and to fully understand the loss that Mark has experienced, especially when that loss is related to an unborn child. I can't even imagine how Gemma felt about the entire situation, especially since she's currently living as a Lumen guinea pig. Yes, unbeknownst to everyone in the real world, Gemma is living as a patient on Lumen's testing floor, which is revealed to contain a series of rooms whose names correspond to files from macrodata refinement. In each room, a different innie of Gemma awakens and is forced to endure an unpleasant experience of some kind. All of which are engineered by one Dr. Mauer, who is himself infatuated with Gemma. But even in spite of his work on the Severance chips, Mauer will have to say goodbye to Gemma once Mark completes his work on the Cold Harbor file. One day, Gemma asks Mauer if she'll ever get to see Mark again, but Mauer answers cryptically and eventually tells her that Mark has remarried and has become a father. He even creepily suggests that she may have moved on in one of the testing rooms, but this causes an incredulous Gemma to hit Mauer over the head with a chair. So she steals his key card, rushes through the hallways, finds an elevator, and ascends up to the exports hall, but when Gemma turns into the oblivious Miss Casey, she's ushered right back into the elevator. Which definitely sucks because it basically proves that Gemma is being held hostage at Lumen against her own will. And we don't even know why Gemma is the one being used as their guinea pig. But I really hope that Gemma ends up being okay, because even in spite of how strained her marriage with Mark became, I really want these two characters to end up together, especially since it's clear that the two really miss each other. And it sucks that they had to endure so much hardship, but I'm sure that they would both appreciate each other better if they did happen to be reunited. But as Mark continues to lay unconscious, Devon, understandably so, begins to freak the fuck out. Ragabi then tells her that Mark is voluntarily reintegrating, which causes Devon to recall the innie cabin where she gave birth to her own daughter. Wondering if it's possible to reawaken Mark there, she suggests calling Miss Cobell for help on how to access the cabin, but Ragabi insists that Cobell will immediately hand them over to Lumen. But when Devon appears not to listen to her, Ragabi abruptly leaves. Thankfully, Mark does eventually wake up on his own, and when Devon asks him where he's been, it's clear that he's still recalling his memories with Gemma. And that's how the episode ends. Unsure if Ragabi is going to return, unsure if Devon is actually going to contact Miss Cobell, and unsure if Mark and Gemma are ever going to be reunited. But after spending an entire episode with these two characters, I definitely do hope that they'll get their happy ending. But I guess we'll see what'll happen on the next episode of Severance once it gets released on Friday.